everyone, and welcome back to the Untold Story podcast. I'm Martha McCallum. Following President-elect Donald Trump's historic win last week, I had the opportunity to sit down with the host of Fox News Sunday Night in America, Trey Gowdy, on his podcast, the Trey Gowdy Podcast. We talked about why Americans came out in droves for the 45th president and why many Democrats were blown away by the results, and how a second Trump administration plans to address the issues on many Americans' minds for years. It was a really interesting conversation, so I wanted to share it with all of you here as well. So I hope you enjoy my discussion with Trey Gowdy.
This time last week, Americans were headed to the polls, and two people were getting ready to co-anchor what, to me at least, is the best political coverage team in all of television. Martha McCallum is ubiquitous, which to my friends, you're going to have to go look that word up. I know y'all don't know what that means. It means everywhere for my friends. She's on debate night, election night, breaking news. She has her own very, very popular weekday show called The Story. She's written books. She does podcasts. She does it all with a smile and a really kind spirit. And unless you insult Notre Dame football, which I will not be doing today.
Well, that's good.
She is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. Hello, Martha McCallum. How are you?
Hello, Trey Gowdy. What a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. We've known each other a long time, and I was really happy to have you on the desk with us on election night because you know, you have a ton of fans in my family, my dad and my husband and everybody else. So it was great to have you in New York.
Well, thank you. I was just as surprised as you were to be out there on election night. I thought I was just the entertainment in the green room. I mean, I look around and there is, I mean, you got the former Speaker of the House and you got Karl Rove and you've got all these really, really Mr. Wonderful. How great would it be to have that for a nickname? I mean, if you could pick any nickname in the world, you probably wouldn't pick Mrs. Wonderful, but that's a pretty good nickname to have.
Yeah, it is. It is. He was great. I love his whole thing with a watch on each wrist and, you know, his red pocket square. And he's smart and fun and interesting to have in the gang. So it's been great.
I do want to ask you about.
It's been wonderful.
Doing live television in a minute. But before that, what surprised you about election night?
It's interesting. It feels like post-election night, you can look back and say, oh, all of this, we should have seen all of this coming. This makes perfect sense, right? But leading into it, you're looking at all these polls that are just, strenuously trying to find anything other than neck and neck, tightest election ever. It was not a good night, for the pollsters. And I felt going in that it was likely, actually, that it was going to flip hard one way or the other, and that we would see a 7-state sweep. And my gut told me that day that it was going to be a Trump 7-state sweep. But all you had was your gut at that point because there wasn't really any clear indication in the polls. But, when you sit back and you look at it, the things that were surprising maybe shouldn't have been, because I think one of the things that surprised me was when I looked at Illinois and New York and New Jersey and these very diehard blue states that he didn't win, but they went more for former president, now President-elect Trump, than we have seen in a long time. And the other truly shocking thing was that Kamala Harris did not outperform Biden anywhere across the country. And just in New York City, as an example, Biden won New York City in 2020 plus 54. And Harris carried New York City plus 34. And that kind of 20-point drop we saw with Hispanic votes, we saw in a number of places around the country that we think of as being very blue. I think there's a shift going on in this country. I think people liked the idea of making America great again. I think it sounded pretty good. And I think they liked, a future president who can sling French fries and convince them that he's actually having fun while doing it. I think one of my favorite moments from the whole campaign was when he was, he'd do the French fries with the salt And then he tossed some salt over his shoulder, like I always do if I spill salt. And then he turned to the kid next to him and he goes, "This is fun." And it was very believable. And I thought, there's a lot here. This is a story I think that people will look back on for a very long time. And it's been a roller coaster, as Americans full well know. But the country was not finished with Donald J. Trump, and they wanted him to be president again.
I have seen him eat French fries before, but I have never seen him prepare French fries before. He likes to order them with lunch at the golf course. So that part of it, his interest in French fries did not surprise me. I guess I am a pessimist because I feel like if you prepare for the worst, then you won't be disappointed and the surprise will be on the good side. So
I'm generally that way as well about everything.
About everything. I never thought I won an election. I never thought I won a trial. So I'm always surprised. But I was sitting back there with Kevin McCarthy and Karl Rove, both of whom know a lot about politics. And Karl in particular had the map pulled up. And he was telling me early on, I was trying to figure out whether or not it could be an electoral tie, which it could have been. But he was telling me she's underperforming Biden everywhere. I knew there'd be an undercount because, you and I were together in 2022 and we thought it was going to be a red wave. And I remember that pre-election meeting where the experts come in, and I remember being surprised that it was not going to be a red wave. Do you remember?
Yep. Oh, yeah. I do. That's when we get the data from the Fox News voter analysis and they share it with us. We can't characterize anything at that point, obviously, but we start to get a look at the data. And yeah, that was a surprise that night for sure.
And so that's what I thought again. There's an undercount. Is it young women like it was in 2022, or is it some other group? What I didn't know is it would be almost every group. Almost every group, except maybe possibly college-educated white women, Donald Trump overperformed, or certainly overperformed what people thought. Even African-American males. I mean, you mentioned Charlemagne last night on television. I don't listen to him, but I do see clips of him. He seems like a pretty introspective guy. He's also not a pro-Trump guy. But he was shocked at that. He was shocked at how well Trump did with men of color.
Yeah. Jonathan Karl said to Charlemagne the God, the radio host of The Breakfast Show, that Trump had won 1 out of every 3 minority votes. And he was completely taken aback when he heard that. I think it's one of the significant moments of realization. And I also thought, as I said last night, Joe Scarborough just scratching his head on Wednesday morning after the election was over because he remembered somebody coming up to him in a grocery store and saying, Trump's going to win. And he said, why? He said, because butter costs $4. And Joe was just like, so? And then his wife said, oh, yeah, it costs $7 sometimes where we shop. That just tells you so much. It tells you that they had focused on many of the wrong things and that they weren't really listening to what was happening in the country. And I don't think you can underestimate the significance of inflation, the impact it's had. You have, a generation of young people who can't afford to buy a house, don't feel like they're going to be better off than their parents were. And of people who've been watching what's going on at the border. And I've said this, I think that we have done award-winning journalism at the border because the border to me is like a Watergate size scandal. And the reporters who uncovered Watergate were heralded for a generation. And I think that our reporters who started putting drones up in the sky over the southern border and started showing people crossing and climbing over mountains and walking right into the country and then being handed, bus tickets and sent to different places in the country, they could then see it. And nobody had shown it to them before. And that's what good journalism and reporting is. We watched what was happening, talked to the people on the border. Hey, where are you from? China, El Salvador, all over the world. Okay. And it reframed what was happening, and they couldn't understand, why is no one at the White House doing anything about this? And they just didn't. They just ignored it and ignored it and ignored it and said it was a story that didn't matter. Well, it mattered. And those are the issues that, Charlemagne the God and Joe Scarborough and the rest of the, media who hadn't really looked at these stories closely woke up to on Wednesday morning.
It seems like the border, at least when I was in the House, it was an immigration issue. It was on the immigration subcommittee, and it kind of stayed within that lane. And then all of a sudden, it morphed into this microcosm of everything that all the reasons people think that our country is headed in the wrong direction, respect for the rule of law. When we watch young victims, many of whom are women, victimized by people, sanctuary cities. We can't get our head around this notion that why would you create a sanctuary city for people who've already broken the law once? Now they've broken it again. Why not create one for people who actually don't break the law? It seems like the border became, it may have been the number one issue, either that or the economy. They were tied for number one. So somehow it got elevated above just immigration. It became like a microcosm for lots of other ills that our country suffers.
I think that's exactly right. And I think back to two things on that. And I find it very interesting that Governor Pritzker, in Illinois said, if you're coming in to take migrants and deport them, you're going to have to come through me. And I didn't think of this. Someone else did. I'm trying to think who it was. Said, I think it was Emily Campagno, actually, when we were on Outnumbered the other day. She said, where was that when people were suffering massive numbers of homicides in the streets of Chicago, and when people who are residents of urban areas in Chicago were standing in front of town council microphones saying, wait, why are there migrants sleeping in my child's rec center where he's supposed to be playing basketball? And these issues makes obvious sense. But, the other person, Jack Brewer, who I spoke with, former NFL star and now, an activist for people in poverty and people who need a hand up. He said to me, you know what? I said, why are more black men voting for Trump? He said, you know why? Because they feel like the government put people who illegally cross the border in front of them, ahead of them, and they're paying taxes. They can't figure out what's going on. So I think all of those are really points that brought it all home to me over the course of covering this. And I think, they really touched on why we saw what we saw on Tuesday night. The Untold Story continues right after this.
All right. You and I both have used the word autopsy. I don't mean it in the literal sense of the word, but after Romney and Ryan lost, Reince Priebus said we need an autopsy as a party, because if you show voters the issues, they side with Republicans until you tell them whose idea it was, and then they side with the Democrats. So we have a really significant brand problem, was what Reince found out. And then for the next 2 years, members of the House were told you have to moderate on the issue of immigration. You have to create a path to citizenship. And it turned out they were wrong. The autopsy was necessary, but the autopsy results were wrong. The American people are not clamoring for a path to citizenship. They may be willing to have one for people who haven't broken the law, but that's not what turned the tide. So if an autopsy is going to be done by Democrats in the aftermath of this, once they get through their stages of grief, defund the police may have been the dumbest idea since the Maginot Line. I'm having a hard time thinking of one dumber than that. Where else should they look for just how badly they did a week ago?
Well, first of all, I think it's very interesting that what ended up working for Republicans was a very organic version of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is no program that has that name. It's simply offering people a good economy, some tax cuts in the first Trump administration. And if Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, had ask themselves after that and during that autopsy, who's going to be the person who can actually, start to get us voters from areas that are not interested in us at all right now? I think they would have been surprised to learn that that was actually Donald Trump, who could diversify the party, who could make it more appealing to the working person, and who could bring in minority numbers like no one has. So I think that's interesting. For Democrats, I think they need to look to Bill Clinton. They need to look to someone who, in their history, and not ancient history, but it's a while ago now, who successfully presented a moderate version of what Democrats stand for and appealed to a whole lot of people across the board. I think you can look at Andy Bashir, you can look at some other people out there who potentially can point the way forward for what the Democratic Party needs to look like. And I think that just like the Republican Party has extremists on the right, Democrats have extremists on the left who have grabbed the microphone in a disproportionate way. And they need to grab it back. They need to figure out what to do to get some of these working voters back, because right now they're like the party of, people who got paid a few million dollars to perform at concerts on Monday night before the election. I'm not sure who their constituency really is outside of the white college women that you talked about and some other people who fall in similar categories, but they really have to figure that out. They got to wake up. And some of them are talking about it in a very clear-headed way. Others are still digging deep into this woke kind of mentality that is why they lost. And I thought it would have been really interesting, actually. And I'm sure she was, Vice President Harris had a very rough week. And so maybe this is an idea that she might come around to. I don't know if she would agree with it or not, but she could have said in that, the next day, don't stay home from school. Don't stay home from work. Don't wallow in being sad. I'm sad right now, she could have said, and I understand how you feel. But really what I want you to do is to get up and go to work today. Go to school today. Tell people who you are. Show them who you are. Work harder than ever. Do not take the day off and go to the Lego room at Georgetown University to, with your crying towel. Get up and go to work today. Do that for me. I think that would have been a message that would have resonated around these universities, and it would have sent a strong signal for the future.
When your core constituency is the philosophy department at Vassar, then no, you're not going to win very many college professors, Antifa, folks who want to defund the police. Seth Moulton, Democrat, former colleague of mine, served in uniform. He has two girls, and he said, I don't want them, being run over by boys on the playing field. He found himself on defense. Not that Seth cares. He was a combat vet. He doesn't care about that. But he finds himself as a Massachusetts Democrat on defense for saying, I don't want my daughters being run over by boys on the playing field. This stat stuns me when I see it. 2/3 of all Republicans don't have a single Democrat friend. 2/3 of all Democrats don't have a single Republican friend. If you want to understand how Donald Trump won, if no one in your life voted for him, how will you ever understand it? I mean, who are you going to ask?
Yeah. And I think, those numbers are disheartening, to be sure. You've done a lot to try to convince people to come together, to find things they have in common. And it's something that Vice President Harris said many times on the campaign trail. We have more in common than what divides us. And I do believe that we need to get back to a place, when I was growing up, nobody talked about who was a Democrat and who was a Republican in my parents' friend group. Although I know that, both of those groups were represented. It wasn't something that everybody wore on their forehead like it is now. And it wasn't I have a friend who is a teacher, and she had sort of let it be known in a intimate conversation with some friends at work that she was leaning towards voting for Trump. And then she was confronted about it by two other teachers who said, how could you? We need to back down from this. We need to understand where people are coming from. And I fear that sometimes only like a huge shock to the system, something really bad, unifies Americans when we have to get together against it, like September 11th. And prior to that, World War II, Vietnam did not bring people together in this country. But I don't want it to take a war or a terrorist attack for people to understand what we have here and to understand how important it is for us to come together. But one hopeful sign that I see, although, it's easy to find examples on The View or wherever, or the Lego room at, an Ivy League university, but I think people are not reacting to this the way that we have seen in the past. I think people are saying, and Charlemagne the God, to his credit, said it. He said, no, I'm not packing my bags and moving to another country. I like this country. I'm an American. This is where I want to be. And I think we need to work through some stuff here. So I hope I'm not wrong, but the early reports and from what I see are that people are not responding to this the way that I think a lot of people thought they might. And I'm grateful that it was a decisive decision, a 7-state sweep in the battlegrounds, an improvement towards the red across the country, and a popular vote win. So people have to say, you know what, there's something going on in this country. Maybe they don't understand what it is, but there's not that battle over what happened. And I think that's a positive sign.
If I remember correctly, and your memory's better than mine, the Washington Post was calling for the impeachment of President Trump in 2016, even before he took office. Peter Strzok, who was investigating President Trump, unbeknownst to us at the time, was calling for his impeachment. Andy McCabe with the FBI was talking about a backup plan in case he wins. I don't hear any of that now. I think the cloud, they really put a cloud over his first term. It is remarkably hard to become president of the United States. Less than 50 people have ever done it. And to put a cloud over someone's presidency for what wound up being a completely debunked allegation of collusion, maybe they won't do that to him this second time. I mean, can you imagine going through the trouble of getting elected, becoming president, and having this like Eeyore, followed around by a cloud for your entire 4 years? I don't see the appetite for that again this time.
I don't see the appetite in the country for it. I hope that, we're going to see some changes in the agencies that make that less likely. Also, it is extraordinary to me. Yesterday, I read an article from the 1990s in Vanity Fair about Trump, just sort of going back and looking at, what made this man who he is and why he reacts to things the way he does. And at that point, he was being pressured by all of these financial entities, and he owed money, and he kept sort of doubling down and tripling down. And, everybody was like, what's going on? Trying to save his firm from, bankruptcy, financial difficulties. But he sort of thrived in that moment. And all the incoming did not dissuade him, did not make him want to get out of the business. It made him want to double down, make some bigger bets, fight his way back. He takes a very interesting perspective to being under attack. And it does fuel him, which I find just fascinating as someone who loves to study history and presidents. This is a unique individual, but he never backed down through the course of this entire thing. I think it's interesting that Susie Wiles is going to be his chief of staff, because I think she was a very steady hand through all of think back to the mug shots. Think back to the walks through the courthouse. I was down there covering it a few days, in and out of the courtroom with all of his, team in that front row sitting there. This is not someone who shrinks from these things, but I hope that he can focus on the work of the people and the presidency, and that we're not going to see this, sort of preemptive attack just because.
I am not an expert on Donald J. Trump. I've been around him, maybe a half dozen, maybe slightly more than that time. But you can tell, I know people laugh when golfers say this. You can actually tell a lot about somebody playing rounds of golf with them. It's an illuminating experience. I think his default is nowhere near what it is portrayed to be. In the aftermath of 2016, when there were a lot of calls to prosecute Hillary Clinton, he took the opposite approach. I can't think of a single political opponent that he actually, quote, went after. Now, he talks like a New Yorker, which is different from the way South Carolinians talk. But for all the talk, when you look at what he did, and if you talk to him in private, he is much more conciliatory than he has ever given credit for. Now, maybe people will say, well, he doesn't talk that way. Okay, that's fine. But look at what he does, which leads me to this. His first administration, now he will never admit he was surprised he won, but the transition was rocky, I would say. And you and I would never write a kiss and tell book about a former boss, but he had a bunch of people that did.
Yep.
So he can't make those same mistakes, personnel mistakes, again. How does he avoid that? I mean, to me, it is disrespectful to work for someone and then write a negative book to profit off of that. It's just, I'm old school, I guess. But how does he avoid making personnel mistakes like the first time?
Well, I think that he has a sharp learning curve, and I think that he will look probably first at people who never left him, because now you've got 8 years of people who, and it's not a huge group, who were never dissuaded, who stayed by him during January 6th and all the period that followed that and all of these indictments. So I think that folks on that list are probably in the very top group of those who he would consider because of that reason, because he really wants to have people that he can trust around him. And then you have to combine that with the very best decisions for the country. So that's a difficult intersection. And I think he's going to make these decisions very carefully. I'm sure it won't be 100%. I'm sure it's probably impossible to not have any leakers and book writers. But it's also interesting that it's a 4-year term, right? So I think he's liberated to say, and his detractors would say, oh, that means he's liberated to do all these horrible things. But the point you make, I think, is a good one, that you have to look at his actions in terms of going after people, which he hasn't wasted a ton of time on. And he said to us a long time ago at a town hall in Iowa, and he's said it since then, success will be my revenge. So let's hope that's where it goes. But these picks are going to be interesting. The Untold Story continues right after this.
Let me ask you about Republicans in general. I'm glad you're sitting down, because this is going to shock you when I say this. Every now and again, they don't get along with each other. So small margin, they're already bickering about the Senate Majority Leader. Folks are weighing in on that, including folks who don't have a vote. It's secret ballot. That I know people don't.
Yeah, that's a big factor, isn't it?
Oh, you better believe it's a big factor. I had a friend that ran for something secret ballot. He got 37 votes, and he said, I'm going to go back to the office and write thank you notes to the 79 people who promised to vote for me. And he only got 37 votes. So I don't know whether Rick Scott can make a run at the two Johns or not.
Is it just a majority to win?
Well, you have to drop, there'll be a second ballot. So whoever's third drops out, and then it's down to 2. And look, I watched a lot of crazy things happen in secret ballot. A lot of people.
Who do you think is the likely winner if it's Sean Thune and Rick Scott and John Cornyn?
My guess is that Rick Scott would be the first to fall out on the first ballot. No disrespect to him at all. I think Cornyn and Thune have been running longer. And
a lot of MAGA support for him. I know Elon Musk came out in favor of Rick Scott and some others. But as you say, a secret ballot is a little bit tough that way. And I wonder if President-elect Trump will just kind of sit back and see what happens here rather than stick his neck out in support of anyone.
I don't want to say he's weighing in. People who purport to speak for him. Absolutely. Yeah. But to date, not a one of them has the first name of senator. So Elon Musk has billions of dollars, but he doesn't have a vote.
He doesn't have a vote. Yeah, exactly.
There are other, former television personalities who have social media followings, but they don't have a vote. So among the guys and gals I talk to that have a vote, it's between Thorne and Cornyn, and people like them both personally. It may come down to the incoming crowd. Dave McCormick, Tim Sheehy.
So Schumer says that both Gallego and McCormick will not be invited to the orientation because they have votes that aren't counted, even though they appear to have majorities that don't appear to be shakeable at this point. What do you think about that?
I think Schumer better enjoy the last couple of weeks where he has any say-so in anything, because that's soon coming to an end. Republicans can organize however they want to. I went through orientation with people who wound up losing their race. That's a Republican decision. Chuck Schumer doesn't get to weigh in on that.
Right.
All right. Well, we will watch. Republicans, I think Mike Johnson is safe, but there are folks that just need attention for fundraising and other. I am worried that history says the president has 2 years, and they better make good use of it. I got to ask you something before I let you go, because I was mesmerized Tuesday night. I like to watch people that are really good at what they do. Lawyers, we're thieves. We just steal from other people that are better than we are. So I'm watching. I struggle to read a teleprompter once a week. I struggle to do it. I watched Tuesday night, and these two words were constantly flashing up: ad lib. Now, I would have read ad lib if it had been on my teleprompter.
I actually started to do that at one point in the wee hours of the night. I was like, what are we doing? Where are we going now?
I would have read ad lib. I would have done it. Just like I've read SOT before. I would have read literally SOT, which means sound on tape for people not in television. But you and Brett, the audience can't tell whether y'all are ad-libbing or whether y'all have scripted it out for days. How do you do that? How do you make it seem like you're not surprised, nothing has you flustered? Y'all are both unflappable.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I definitely felt like I had marbles in my mouth after, hours 7 or 8. But you know what? I feel so fortunate. We have such a great team. And this is a business where I don't think a lot of places can honestly say that, to tell you the truth. But we genuinely respect each other and the group of people that we work with. This has been an intense work year for all of us, but it has been a delight because we spent a lot of time together in Iowa and in Chicago and in Milwaukee and twice in Milwaukee for the Republican debate and then back for the convention. And we respect each other. We enjoy each other. And I think that's what people see out there. The other side of it is that when you have a story that drives as hard as a presidential race, you sort of just, hang on to the reins and see where that horse is taking you. And you try to stay calm and in the moment, and also realize that you're talking about a historic moment. Actually, my favorite thing that I saw, someone sent me someone posted on social media, is just the voiceover that Brett and I were doing as we called the presidency. This was just after Wisconsin. And you could see the headquarters at Trump camp. And of course, you saw all the sad long faces over at the Harris camp, which is just a reflection of any election night looks like that. It's very tough for people who are on the losing side. And there's a voiceover of Brett announcing that Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States. And then I talk a little bit about how it all played out. And it's just our voices over this crazy cheering crowd at the Trump headquarters. And I thought, boy, am I so lucky to be able to announce something like this at a historic moment. As you say, fewer than 50 people have held the presidency. So I'm just grateful, to be honest, grateful to be part of it. It's just a terrific company. We have great leadership, and I'm really grateful for those big moments.
Well, I was both grateful and shocked to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning with you. I kept thinking, well, has everybody else gone on? Even my own mother said, why were you on like at 3 a.m.? Why didn't they go get somebody good?
You are far too humble. Everybody loves to hear what Trey Gowdy has to say. And I also don't believe that you don't read a teleprompter well, because I've seen you do it very well. And I think about you doing closing arguments, just walking through that courtroom and chairing the oversight committee, and what a silver tongue you had for all those moments. So that's what made you so famous and well known, and people love that about you.
Well, those were easy. Television is a lot harder to me. Before I let you go, I want to say two things and then ask you one more question. Your father has always been incredibly kind to me. He scares the daylights out of me when I talk to him on the phone, but he's incredibly kind to me. And your husband is so nice to my wife. You mentioned Iowa and New Hampshire, and sometimes our families travel with us. She thinks his sarcasm is funny. She doesn't really think mine is all that funny. But
we have that in common then.
I mean, she thinks he's funny, but she's never said that about me. Yeah, but I do want to thank him for how nice he is to my wife.
He loves you guys, and it is great when our families get to catch up with us on the campaign trail, and it expands the group, and we get to see the people that mean the most to each other, which is pretty special too. Your wife is a wonderful woman, and you're a great team. I love seeing you guys together. So, and my dad, my dad is so sharp. He's 92, and he gives me some of the best advice about coverage and, why isn't anyone talking about this? This would be a great point for someone to make, i.e. you, tomorrow. And I'm just so blessed to have him.
Does he scare you, or is it just me?
Yeah, absolutely. No, he is. He's wise. And so he can be a little to the point. Let's just say that.
All right. When I think
he loves you.
For some reason.
And you've been kind enough to reach out to him and talk to him, which he's a huge fan of you and your show. And I told him I was going to be on Trey Gowdy last night. He was like, oh, that's fantastic.
Well, I only have 5 or 10 viewers, so I need to cultivate the ones I have and keep them
Don't
watching.
Believe that, people at home.
All right, Veterans Day. Actually, when I think of you, that is one of the very first words that goes through my mind because of the passion that you have for people that wore the uniform. So before I let you go, I just want you to reflect, why does that day, I think even Lindsay maybe was overseas in Normandy with you. You've written books about that generation. Why are you so passionate about people that have served and sacrificed for our country?
Well, my dad served in the Navy. That was always an inspiration to me. And he was ROTC at Brown, not in action. He was between the wars, but he was in training, obviously, for all those years. And my mother's first cousin, Harry Gray, was killed at the age of 18 at Iwo Jima, which always I found just such a sad and compelling story. I had his letters that my mom had saved that motivated me eventually to write a book about his story. And then that led to me learning about the other guys who were with him and expanding on their personal stories and bringing it all together in a book called Unknown Valor, which was just a gift to, honestly, to me, it was just one of the biggest gifts of my life to have the opportunity to write that and to get to know them. And so it continues. I'm just grateful for the sacrifice of so many men and women. And I think of them on Veterans Day. I try to think of them every day. And I just really, I just feel lucky, honestly, to have met some of these people who are 80, 90, 100 years old. We were in Normandy for the 75th anniversary and the 80th anniversary. And there's just no more satisfying work for me than to be in their presence and to tell their stories.
My mom was sharing with me last night. She went to church and they had the veterans stand up, and she says every year it gets smaller and smaller.
Yes.
The number.
Yes.
So thank you for that. You are the Bono of television, the Jack Nicklaus.
I know he might take issue with that.
Bono, that's as high a compliment as I can give. Martha McCallum, you got a show to go get ready for 3:00 Eastern time, and every other major event that happens, you'll be there for it. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to talk to you, Trey.
Yes, ma'am. Take care.
You too.
That's the Untold Story for today. I'm Martha McCallum. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Untold Story with Martha McCallum. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Make sure to rate and review. For more podcasts, go to foxnewspodcast.com. Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.